quickly. There we go. There we go. My name is Natalie Hudson, and I am calling in from the University of Dayton, where I work as an associate professor of political science, and I direct a human rights studies program. And you are joining us today for the Women's Human Rights for Peace and Security. How can you educate better? And we are glad that you are here with us today. Today we're sharing with you one sort of small piece of this resource. It is a much larger collection of tools and resources for, we hope, academics, practitioners, activists. And what we're going to be sharing with you today is a reflection of work that started in the spring of 2020 and has continued through the fall. For me, at least, it was an excellent distraction this summer from all of the political tensions and health-related concerns that we were all facing. And so I felt very privileged to contribute to this one small piece of the resource. What we're sharing with you today will be one module of 6 modules that make up the resource. We'll be focusing on peaceful and inclusive societies. And our presenters today include both our organizers of the resource as well as the team that contributed to this module. So Dr. Sun-Young Yoon, Erica Higbee, Katrina Leckrich, Ivy Koch, Sam Cook, Anne-Marie Getz, and myself. And we do recognize that we had tremendous privilege this summer to work on this. And we recognize our position in that. And we hope that today we can get more diverse perspectives and reactions and feedback, frankly, on the module as you all, as attendees, experience it. So we are going to have to adjust our program a bit today, and I will, some of our presenters are just learning of this as they sign on, but we had planned to do a breakout groups with you all, but we are set up in a Zoom webinar format, which means that is not going to be an option for us. But we do still have a really exciting program, so we'll hope that you'll hang on with us and stay for the duration. So just a brief overview of how we plan to run the next couple of hours together. After my remarks, I will sort of point you to a snap poll that we put in the agenda of the CSW platform, where you can sort of answer some questions about where you're coming from and what your role is, so we have a sense of who's here. And then we'll turn to Erica and Sun-Young for some background on the resource and its origins in fwMAP and Beijing Plus 25 efforts. And then we'll get into the module. And so we'll spend some time looking at various pieces of or various subtopics within the module. And instead of going into breakout groups, we'll sort of take turns. You'll get to hear from all of us. So I think what we intended to do in breakout groups, we will do in the larger group, and we'll use the chat function for discussion and questions throughout that. Then hopefully about 11:30, we'll have peace activist and GNWP fellow Gwen Muganda, who is from Kenya, just to reflect on the module and to talk to us a little bit about what it might mean for her experience. And then shortly after that, we'll welcome Sarah Douglas, who has a long and done a lot of really important work at the UN around women, peace, and security. And she spent some time looking at the module, and will give us some feedback and some insights as to how this might apply to both the UN as well as, of course, the UN Women's Global Compact on women, peace, and security. And then we will wrap with some discussion and Q&A. So we look forward to an exciting and hopefully a thought-provoking time with you all here. If you have a moment, please go into the agenda where you could sort of do a chat. There's also a poll, you can complete that. And I think at this point, I will turn it over to Erica and Sun-Young to talk a little bit about the project, the overall. So let's see here. So
Did you see how I magically appeared out of nowhere?
Mm-hmm.
So exciting to be here with you all. I think people are still coming online. This is a very interesting event. I don't know if you realize that we are 25,000 people at the NGO Forum and really bursting with energy and ready to go. I wanted to talk a little bit about the background of this particular project because it's probably never been told. It's going to be very personal. And so I'll take you back about 2 years on my birthday when I was sitting and talking with my friend Krishanti Demaraj, and I was really very grumpy. I said to her, we're about to go into Beijing 25. And I'm really worried that we're going to have a lot of celebrations, panels. We might even have a big event and great meetings. But at the end, what will we have that's very concrete? Today's event is it. This event and this project offers an impressive product of Beijing plus 25. So at the fwMAP team, we wanted to bring together two knowledge systems, one based on scholarship and another from activism at the UN. And we thought it would be so exciting to experiment, to innovate, and bring these groups together. So this is not an easy thing to manage. And I really give Erica credit. I've told her again and again that it was her skillful coordination. Nobody dropped out. Everybody pitched in. I think it's really important to emphasize that this was a volunteer effort. And this volunteer group, many of you in the room, produced a model collective curriculum that really laid the foundation for Beijing 25 on civil society side. This peace and security module is particularly timely and practical. So we were concerned that a whole generation of young people might not know the rich legacy of UN mandates, notably, the Beijing Platform for Action, 189 countries, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and the Sustainable Development Goals, the three together, one policy, one legally binding, the other one with measurable targets. So why does this really matter? As you may know, this Generation Equality Forum that is going to be held by Mexico on the 29th to the 31st of March, and then France from June 29th to July 2nd, then convened by UN Women, will launch these 6 action coalitions. The 6 action coalitions correspond to the 6 themes that this project has worked on. These deal with, and I will name them, gender-based violence, economic justice, bodily autonomy, sexual and reproductive health and rights with bodily autonomy, climate justice, technology and innovation, and feminist movements. In addition, you will hear today that there's really important global compact on women, peace, and security, which many of us believe really has to be the underlying theme for all of the other 6 themes. The action coalitions are really an interesting innovation approach. They're going to be working outside the UN with governments, philanthropy and private sector, civil society, and international organizations like the UN, but they are intended to accelerate action on the UN agenda. But these actions and the demands that they will make really need to be grounded in the UN commitments I just mentioned if they're going to gain traction with member states. And it's bringing that agenda back into the UN system that we hope will accelerate and scale up in a way that you can't do actually without the UN. So that's why your work here has been so important, not as an end product, but really as a beginning for a well-informed and really grounded set of action plans based on a very rich legacy. So thanks so much to everyone, Natalie. And Erica, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Soon-Young. I'll just rehash a little bit of what Soon-Young said. One of the primary motivations for creating the fwMAP Universities and Teach-Ins group, which was sort of the think tank that got this project going, was breaking silos and providing online access to working documents about women's human rights. One that is grounded in globally recognized precedents, as Soon-Young has been talking about. The intention was to develop a resource that could be utilized by university professors, but also by public health experts, environmentalists, business administrators, journalists, schools, mayors and city councils, women's and youth groups, media, and cultural innovators. So this resource was created to help bridge academia, grassroots movements, and activism at the United Nations. We wanted to create a living document and a user-friendly resource for educators and activists. We decided a good structure for this project would be learning modules, organized around fwMAP's 6 themes, dealing with the most pressing challenges to women's human rights today. 50 academics, researchers, civil society leaders, and UN experts spent 6 months working in teams developing 42 lesson plans. They created fun group activities that include videos, animations, interactive resources, and advocacy opportunities. All of this is anchored in foundational UN agreements and significant human rights documents. This resource is comprehensive, the one that you're seeing now on the screen, but it is by no means exhaustive. It is a living document. We need teachers and activists to provide feedback, and hopefully some of that will happen today, and create subtopics of their own. So we want to add and build on what we've started here. Hopefully in the process, we will build new alliances and empower existing movements through knowledge. Thanks. Back to you, Natalie.
Great, thank you. My apologies, I was trying to share the screen and it wasn't quite working, but I'm glad we got that background up. What I want to do now is to give everyone here just a quick, let's see if I can pull this up without, before we turn to Katrina, a quick overview of the subtopics that we'll cover today under the module that we all worked on, which was the Peaceful and Inclusive Society module. And so in this module, there were 6 subtopics, and we'll spend some time getting into each of these today. So maybe we'll begin with Katrina, and then I can take us through some of the introductory material. And then if Sam and Anne-Marie would like to just show us a little bit of what they have in some of the topics that they worked on more closely, I think that would be a great way forward, and we can use the chat function for the breakout. So you can see the 6 subtopics that we have within this module. So with that, I will stop my screen share and turn it over to Katrina, who I think should also have screen share. Is that right? You're good? Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you everyone for attending. It's really exciting after quite a few months of working on this resource to be able to share it finally with all of you. I have the pleasure of walking us through the more specific breakdown of what the resource looks like and how we've divided it, and hopefully has been able to be useful for some of you, and if not, will be in the future. So here I'm screen sharing with you the web page, which I hope someone in the meantime can share in the chat, of the resource itself. It is very comprehensive, as we've heard by both Sun Young and Erica and Natalie as well. So we, this group, have been working on the module, which is the Peaceful and Inclusive Societies. So I will go onto this page. And when you arrive onto each of the module pages, there is a slight description, explanation of the topic, and then we can delve right into the subtopics, which Natalie just showed us. I worked primarily on 3 of these subtopics, but today we're going to be looking at, or at least I'll be talking about, the Women and Peace Building subtopic. All of them are divided similarly within their table of contents, because we are trying to keep a homogeneous, easy to navigate platform and easily understandable outline. So all of our different subtopic categories begin with some sort of introduction on the matter. This one is Women in Peace Building. We also define learning outcomes for each of them, usually about 3 or 4, to try and make this digestible. We did keep in mind that this was primarily for undergraduate students, but this has been and can be useful for many more purposes. It does not have to be only in a formal classroom. Many of my colleagues will be able to talk about this some more. But we do offer some academic and activist literature, both in a reading and watching capacity. Some of us have shared YouTube links to different informational videos. Some of us have included either toolkits, as you see here, from the Global Network of Women Peace Builders, which I'm representing proudly today, and others have shared from other fellow activists and scholars. Next, we ask folks who are participating in this or who are benefiting from this to do a little bit of research, to get your mind going, to understand or to begin to think about the issue at hand. And so all of our sections have a little bit of prior research that we encourage that be assigned either as homework or as the beginning to really create an umbrella framework for the chapter or the subtopic. We also found it useful to include key ideas, definitions, and key actors in institutions, understanding that not everyone is familiar with these topics, and also to be able to refer back to some key different resources that are available. So you'll see the same framework and the same structure in all of the subtopics. Some of them have very extensive lists, some have less, but nonetheless, there are still many different resources available. Now we've divided at least this one in 2 primary lectures. There are multiple lectures available in other subtopics, but primarily there are 2 or 3 different lectures per subtopic. Because this one is on women and peace building, we begin by defining what peace building is. Obviously, we cannot define peace building without talking about Johan Galton and others, especially looking at it from an academic perspective, but also looking at it from a UN perspective, because this is a partnership with others who are working both in academia and elsewhere. And so here we have we've tried at least to collect different resources and different understandings of peace buildings from different areas of the field. We tried as well to include a lot of visuals, or as many visuals as possible, to try and make this a little bit more interactive and easier to understand for our visual learners and those who prioritize visual learning. And you can also see that all of our links are hyperlinked, which we've tried to do both so that folks can have the recognition they deserve, but as well for folks to be able to use this as a tool to get started. And so, for example, if this what is peace building wheel is very interesting to you from International Alert, you're able to then go browse their website, which talks about this wheel in more depth. We have lecture number 2 here on the needs specifically for women peace builders. And we've divided this in different specific categories about sexual gender-based violence against women, women's representation in post-conflict governance, gender and economic recovery, and so on and so forth. These as well have all of these different hyperlinks, which will bring you to different resources on the topic that we are discussing. Because we want this to be interactive and we are trying to serve a purpose of creating discussion, initiating activism, and really creating this non-static resource, we did include a lot on discussions and different activities that can be promoted and used as exercises for these subtopics. And so all of our subtopics have either exercises or activities that are included in them that we recommend that would fit well with this topic. I have, for example, lectured a number of times as a current PhD student using these different subtopics, and I found it extremely helpful. And I've also done this in my other capacity, wearing my hat as co-founder of the Canadian Coalition of Youth for Youth, Peace and Security, where we conduct different workshops on what is youth peace and security and what is peace and security generally with young people across Canada. And with that, what we've done is we've pulled some of these resources to do workshops with young people, even high school students, so that they can further understand and feel as though they can grasp the concepts, which are far reaching for many of them. Most of them are not active in UNEs, if you wish, the language of the UN, the policy language. And so the way that the subtopics have been developed can be adapted and used in different contexts. I think I'll leave it at that for now. I know, Natalie, you might have some other things to add, but I'd love for us to be able to delve deeper into the subtopics. I personally think it's very multifaceted and interesting and useful to use, and we hope that you agree with us. But we're also hoping to be able to get some feedback from you, either general feedback or more detailed feedback, because we do want this to be an evolving and growing project, as has been mentioned. So back to you, Natalie.
Great, thank you so much. So I would encourage you to, if you'd like, to put your questions in the chat, because after I share a little bit here, we will pause for some questions or discussion before moving on to Anne-Marie and Sam. So please do take advantage. What I want to do is sort of build off of what Katrina has said. She sort of and showed you one of the subtopics, the peace building. I think it would be useful to, and she had it all sort of ready to go in terms of the files, but for many of you, you're looking at this resource for the first time. So I think it'd be sort of useful to walk you through how I get even to the module where we're at. And then I'd like to show you a little bit of the introductory material that we have there. So if you're at the home page here, you can see the other modules. So the resource doesn't just cover peaceful and inclusive societies, but a whole range of topics, as was mentioned earlier. And then we come here to the peaceful and inclusive societies component. And one of my favorite parts about this module is that we did spend some time, thanks to Anne-Marie's leadership and others' input, really developing not just these subtopics, women's experiences in conflict and feminist peace activism, but we spent some time going over sort of conceptually, what do we mean by conflict and war and peace? And how can we introduce not just students, but practitioners to thinking more holistically, more analytically about war and conflict. And so for this module, you will see here that the introductory material has some excellent resources for introducing readers and learners to the concept of women, war, and peace, and what this is all about and why it matters. And I'll just direct you to some of the learning outcomes of the introductory material, because I think it's really valuable. But thinking about how do we situate armed conflict among not only global conflict, but humanitarian crises? How do we define war, and how are these definitions of war gendered in some really important ways? And how do these understandings of conflict and peace line up with the Beijing Platform for Action and the mandate that came out of that conference in 1995? And then really beginning to think about and situate students' understanding of war, particularly for a US audience, but we hope to, that it's relevant much beyond that, to thinking about one's own country situation in the context of war and militarized violence in societies. And so we have some really fun, I think, interesting exercises around utilizing databases to understand where one's country situates in terms of war and conflict. So whether it's using the index at the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security, or the Global Peace Index, or using the database out of Uppsala around conflict, getting students into some material to really get a sense and challenge some assumptions about which countries are at war and which countries are at peace is a really powerful part of this introductory material. The other thing I'll point you to here, and you'll see this throughout the module in various components, is we even have PowerPoint slides. Let's see if I can pull that up, that can be utilized and can be, are open for one's uses to pull material as they see fit. So in my own class this term, I was able to use some of these slides to introduce students to concepts around war and peace, I think in really powerful ways. So you can see some of the tools here around connections to Beijing, questions that can serve as, and images that can serve as really, I think, provocative starting grounds for group discussion and for really problematizing how we think about war and peace. And so there's lots of material here. We have almost 30 slides that can be utilized for one's purposes. And so we're hoping to get some feedback on that today. So I think I can't see the chat, but I don't know if there are questions here quite yet.
This is Soon Young here. There isn't a question, but there is an important clarification. Mm-hmm. Katrina, that was such a nice presentation. Thank you for that as well. The clarification, in fact, comes from your colleague, Mavic, who is here with us from the clarifying that UN Women serves as the Secretariat. So it's not like this is UN Women's project as such, but they are the Secretariat for the Generation Equality Forum and for the Global Compact on Women, Peace and Security and Humanitarian Action. But the membership and the participation is comprised of civil society, UN entities, member states. As a matter of fact, it is civil society that advocated for the establishment of the compact. And I suspect that was partly your organization, Katrina, that made that happen. So congratulations on that.
Great, thank you. All right, so with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie, are you wanting to share a screen here?
Yes.
Do you have?
Yes, if you would let me share a screen. Of course, I've got to find, here, this should work.
There we go.
Can you see that?
We can, yeah.
Great. So, yeah, let me join everyone else in welcoming the participants. We're so happy to see you here, and we would be really interested in following up with you on testing out this module in different formats, this entire approach. Soon Young, this is her brainchild, this idea of reviving the 1960s version of a teach-in. But we haven't really tested it yet. And so if any of my students are on this call, I really look forward to our gender group at the Center for Global Affairs at New York University. I look forward to hearing from you as to whether this works for a teach-in. A lot of us who've been involved are activists or academics. And so, you know, on the academic side, I recognize that, you know, we have followed some traditional ideas about pedagogy in the sense that, you know, a lot of this is organized around specific kind of sessions where there's an instructional component, definitely a strong preparation component, and discussion questions. So, you know, what Katrina said about using some of these lectures as teaching material, you know, indeed, in many ways, the material is almost best adapted for a teaching environment. Like, you know, I can imagine lecturers of all kinds, especially ones that are, you know, kind of maybe, you know, sort of didn't prepare enough for a certain session, jumping on this, and there's, wow, a ready-made PowerPoint, wow, a ready-made lecture even. I'm not saying, Katrina, that you're not prepared. You're the most organized and prepared person I think I've ever met. So I'm not saying that, but I can certainly imagine myself having to teach something on, let's say, feminist mobilization in conflict countries and thinking, I really, really could use some examples. And I think one of us is going to talk about it, because not only do you have fabulous examples, but, you know, you even have short 1.5 minute videos from women peace builders, all of them completely original material to use. Anyway, I'm blithering on too much. Natalie, I'm assuming I've got like 3 minutes left. So
you're fine. You're fine. Take your time. You're good.
Okay. So this is the first kind of formal part of the module, the first subtopic, which is women's experience in armed conflict, women's experiences. And the reason we start with this is because all gender analysis starts with women's experiences and women's truths. And so, you know, that's step one, by the way, in case anybody is wondering, how do you do gender analysis of anything? Ask women is the first thing. Look at where are they? How are they affected by a particular problem? What are they doing about it? And is anybody listening? And that, by the way, is what you need to know about gender analysis. I can see Sun Young cracking up. It is a little more complicated than that, but okay. So this particular module has 3 lectures or 3 kind of major themes, and you can see them here in the table of contents. And it relates to the various ways in which women are directly experience war. We can't get away from the fact that women are often the specific targets of fighting in modern wars. And this is, of course, due to the shift to targeting civilians, which has made war much more dangerous for women than it is for soldiers, as General Patrick Cammaert pointed out some years ago. And so in relation to that, we do zero in on a very specific harm that women and girls experience differently from men and boys, although men and boys experience it too. And we note that and we talk about it. But that's sexual violence in conflict, because this particular area of harm has received a great deal of attention. And then finally, we look at what conflict means for changing gender roles. Because of course, armed conflict brings a gigantic shock to any society, and often gender role shifts that had been considered inconceivable before conflicts become necessary. And some of those gender role changes, such as women moving, for example, if you remember World War I and World War II, women moving into heavy industry, for example, women moving into management, women moving into governance, especially of local communities. Some of those shifts can be capitalized on and built on after wars for women's empowerment. Now, you all remember World War I, women were vital to the war effort in Europe, and they capitalized on that in a big way by demanding the vote immediately after the war everywhere. It was a huge, if you like, peace dividend for gender equality. World War II, that didn't happen, interestingly, because of the social construction of the need to have women return to traditional gender roles, while returning veterans from the front resumed industrial jobs, governance positions, and so on. So we have, gigantic historical examples of positive use of the peace dividend for gender equality versus a step back. You may even remember after World War II, fashions changed. Fashions during World War II, women wore pants and, sort of, well, not short skirts exactly, but they, practical clothing. After the end of World War II, suddenly fashions included big swirly, skirts, and women were encouraged to think about buying expensive vacuum cleaners instead of thinking about pursuing careers. So that's another aside, sorry about that. Okay, so as with all of the modules, we start by explaining what you're going to be able to do. That's the learning outcomes, what you're going to be able to do after this module. You'll be able to explain how gender affects how people experience conflict. And then you're going to analyze the various gender roles women take, and also be very clear about how to understand the harms experienced by women. All of the modules start, every single lecture, every session starts with, usually it's read, watch, and research. Here there's just read and watch. So some suggestions about things you can read, and almost always a video or a movie to watch. This one is fwMAP. If any of you haven't seen this, by the way, these are live links here mostly. If any of you haven't seen this film, it's a really moving account by a very young mother in Syria and her baby called Sama in I believe it's Homs. Maybe it's not Homs. Is it Homs, guys? It's and you know, during the bombardment, awful, but an extraordinary story about enduring the bombardment. Now I'm going to skip through all this stuff. There's so many resources here that you can refer to for definitions and legal clarity. And so, you know, we start this first session with explaining how women are sometimes directly targeted and what that means. I'm not going to go through the whole lecture because I'm out of time. There's often, we chuck in all kinds of interesting illustrations. In this case, a UN Women infographic, which you could spend an hour on just kind of looking at what it tells you. What's the impact of conflict on girls' education, and so on. The second lecture, of course, goes into great detail on sexual violence and conflict, how thinking about it has shifted dramatically from seeing it as collateral damage, as a problem created by individual men, versus understanding how it's a structural feature of war used to advance military or political objectives. And the final session, I think I've just skipped over it maybe, it should be about changing roles. And I can't find where it begins, but again, it's about how do we understand how gender roles change, why they change, and under what circumstances are women able to build on those changes and secure advances and use those positions to then try to influence the way peace is made and the way peace is built after war. So I will stop there. You guys still there?
Natalie, you need to unmute if you're speaking.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. We appreciate the overview, and there is so much there. You know, we envision, I'll say, each of these subtopics, trying to think about how could you do a subtopic in about an hour. And I think, like most academics, we overshot the mark in many ways. But within each of the subtopics, there's sort of generally three areas to cover, but the hope is that each area you could spend 20 to 30 minutes on and do it justice, right? And so that is sort of was the thinking behind the curriculum development as best we could. So with that, I will turn it over to Sam Cook, and I'll have her talk a little bit about the accountability subtopic. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Natalie. And will I be able to share my screen? Oh,
I
yes,
think
looks
so.
like I have a button.
Do you have a button? Oh, good.
Thank you, everybody. I do. Thank you. And a shout out to Erica again, who really was the most gentle of guides, herding cats without, you know, getting any of us too riled up. Thank you. So I am going to take us through another one of the sections. I'm going to jump right to the bottom, actually, the end of the section, but one of the most critical things. Oh, it's asking me what I want to share, and now it's confusing. Okay, there we go. Unlike so many of you, I haven't spent my pandemic life on Zoom, so pardon me for my slowness sometimes. So this section is on accountability and rights promotion. And I think it's also one of the sections that it would be most useful, at least for me, to get feedback and actually additional ideas and resources for how we can talk about accountability, especially in the breach. I think one of the experiences I had working as a lecturer was students saying, okay, all of these words are so great, but what difference does it make? Or getting super excited about the various documents and wondering why they hadn't changed the world. And obviously, so many of you who are attending here today have your own stories of accountability and are part of this effort actually to bring accountability. So the way we have looked at this section, I'm not going to go through the, I sort of thought I'd put it out like this so you can see more things at once. Like the other sections, we have the learning outcomes, the preparation, and the key definitions and terms. And we sort of honed in here on CEDAW, which we'll see later, as a way to think through national level accountability that can be, that people can get involved in. And then we also looked at national action plans and the more local and greater sort of version of those, the local action plans, and then also regional action plans. Obviously, there are many, many areas that one can look at when thinking about accountability mechanisms, especially when we think about the Beijing Platform for Action, which is obviously, given how many platforms there are, has spawned many, many efforts in different areas. And each of the modules in this entire effort will have areas where, you know, different legislative efforts are pointed out, or where different individual documents have been adopted to promote accountability in that area. So we have, the first lecture was about understanding the possibilities for accountability. And, you know, many of you know that the Beijing Platform for Action on its own, we are still struggling against the resistance to accountability, if you like. We are 25 plus years on, and many of the things in the platform are still a dream. But I am pleased to say, and this is sort of quite sort of a side point, is that when I was working at the UN, one of the things I would always point out in Platform E on Women and Armed Conflict was the mention in the Platform for Action on ending our reliance on nuclear weapons. And I want to just give a shout out to all those activists from ICANN who this year, the Treaty Against Banning Nuclear Weapons went into effect. And that is like something that I must say, when I first read the Beijing Platform and that particular call, I didn't think it would ever happen. So these things do happen, and we must celebrate those achievements as well. So there are various international law instruments that, you know, we can take off from the Beijing Platform for Action. And the thing that is always pointed to in the women and conflict sort of area, the women, peace and security area, is Resolution 1325, and then we'll follow on resolutions after that, forming what we have come to know as the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. But what we don't focus on so much is how all of these other pieces of legislation at different levels sort of feed in to these things. So I'm going to actually jump into that, which is the second lecture, was thinking about how we go from this global policy to accountability at the local level. And there are links here which I think are really useful. And for those of you who are teachers at different levels, whether at university or otherwise, these action plans offer a really good opportunity to work through what these obligations mean at the country level where you are, or even in your local community. And there are lots of exercises that can be designed to help students think through these. So obviously there's the research part where you can look at these action plans, and there's a database, which you'll see my cursor is hovering over this database of national action plans here. There's actually a lovely cushion I saw embroidered the other day that said, there's a nap for that. So those of you who are into your national action plans, there's also a knitting pattern. And I'm actually going to go to, sorry for this. I'm just going to go to single screen here, because otherwise, every time I move my cursor, I get a bit confused. Okay, so the regional action plans, which is a much newer thing since 2020, I believe, and those of you who are still working in the field know this much better. And then there are also localization plans. And the Global Network of Women Peace Builders has done an amazing job of actually pulling together a localization toolkit, which I'm afraid to click on now because I don't think I'll ever get back. There's that. And this is the part that I really wanted to focus on here in this little tour, is these exercises. So the first of these is applying the implementation scorecard. So the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders has also developed a 1325 scorecard, which is a tool that people can use to track implementation. And I encourage folks to actually use that. Here's a page example, which let's see if I can, yeah, there you go. You can actually see a little bit more there, which is really pretty amazing. And it looks at all of these different factors: legislation, civil society, funding to civil society, funding to governments. And these are all various things that can be tracked and scored per country. You could do this for your city government. There are all sorts of possibilities here, which I think are amazing. And then on the level of the UN, well, the international level at least, CEDAW, which has been an amazing tool for activists. And there's been so much work done over the years to get civil society involved in the CEDAW process. And actually, we put an exercise in here, which I've had much success doing with students, which is to actually work through what does a CEDAW process involve, and to get them to go and look at actual UN documents, because I feel that often those of us who've worked in the system are quite familiar with these headings and numbers and all of these things. But I think this is an area where having students become familiar with these documents is one of the ways of demystifying things and getting them active. So what you can do is go and get the country reports, you know, pick a year, pick a country, get a country report. There are lots of guides available that you can find here, and have students look at what goes into a report for a country and what do NGOs do in response or ahead of time to address the claims made by countries about their accountability. Natalie, please wave to me when I'm almost out of time, because it's the only visual I have. Thank you. So in this, you can give students, for example, a country report, a shadow report, a committee report, and have them in groups actually look through those and what they mean with reference to CEDAW itself. And it really is quite eye-opening, particularly when students discover the parts of the convention which basically cut out large chunks of responsibility, and countries are able to say, well, we're not going to actually do those things because it conflicts with our cultural beliefs or religious beliefs, or et cetera, et cetera. And these kinds of discussions can also be really rich ways to think about what it is that is actually addressed through these documents and what gets left out, what is not, what is not dealt with along the way. So I highly encourage folks to think about exercises like this. And honestly, if any of you have done, this is the kind of thing we're looking for. If you've done an exercise in a workshop or with a class, we need links here to that, because that is, I think, where a lot of the learning happens, and not just in kind of reading the text as we go. And I think that I have then, oh, here we go, a little bit more. This says it's linked. Oh, it is. I'm not going to click again. Another, this and many of the things in the introduction, folks can go and look at what their country has done. How much does your country spend on the military? How much does your country spend on this? What has it done to, et cetera, et cetera? So what has your country or organization done is a really good way in, I think, for a lot of students. And this little plan of action thing at the end is a kind of model for that. It's like, what can you, and you'll find many students will say, what can I do? I'm not connected to the government, I'm not, et cetera, et cetera. Well, many of those same people who are sitting in an undergraduate lecture now are going to be president of somewhere one day. And we only hope that these opportunities are ones that they can then have in their mind. Oh, I actually know about CEDAW, I know what I can do, etc. I can go and volunteer at a local organization that integrates refugees into the community. And those small things are actually part of this massive web. This feminist movement that we're making is not just about participating in public events. It's also about those small things we do in the place that we're from. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much. And please do ask questions of us and send us send us ideas. And I'm going to mute myself now and also disappear from the video. Bye.
Thank you, Sam. So I have put a couple of questions to prompt our attendees in the chat. And we would really appreciate your responses either in the chat, or you can use the raise hand function. We'll take a few minutes for some questions and discussion. And the questions that are there, perhaps maybe for those of you who aren't looking at the chat, is given where you are and the kind of work you do, how do you see yourself maybe using this resource? What do you see as the challenges perhaps? And how might we make this more accessible? And so those are the questions we'd love some feedback. While you think, I'll just show you briefly the poll responses that you all gave here. Just not gonna let me do that. Over here. So we have a sense of who is in the space today. So here's our, let's try. There it is. So if we look at the poll and we're looking, can you see it okay? Okay, so in terms of who's here, educators, students, but the largest group are NGO staff and advocates. And so I think we're particularly keen on knowing how all groups, but particularly these groups might use the resource. And then the second polling question to get a sense of regions of the world, very, very rudimentary, but nonetheless a sense. And I think this is something that we as the creators, particularly of this module, really struggled with in terms of what it meant as, you know, largely active advocates and academics from the US or North American context to create a module on this topic and to talk about conflict in a way that we realize presents some real fundamental challenges in terms of our own place of privilege. So we would definitely welcome feedback in this regard as well. So I'll stop sharing my screen and give a chance for any questions or hands raised. And I'll look and see.
Natalie, while you're doing that, can I just remind people that you can go into this event and you can start your own discussions online as well. So Natalie showed you some of the polls, but you can also ask questions there and start a discussion on that page. So Katrina, that's for you. Start a discussion. What I'm saying is that we can continue our event online by going there. That's where everyone can see everyone else. So welcome there. Do you see anything, Natalie?
Not yet, but you know, I know it is a lot to absorb. One question here that we have is this geared to college students, community groups? So we talked a lot about this at the beginning stages, and I invite my colleagues to chime in. I think we decided to pitch it at a sort of college student level, not a first year college student, but someone in sort of that middle range, perhaps middle to upper range. But we did sort of keep in mind, I think, as we created it, is how could we keep it accessible beyond the college classroom? And I think in this module in particular, the introductory material around armed conflict, around gender analysis, there's quite a bit there that one could use with the right preparation to share this resource with community groups and with advocacy organizations in a real sort of teach-in style where you learn alongside one another as opposed to professor telling students what they need to know, right? We tried to create it in a way where there was a much more collaborative, could be a very collaborative learning space and the tools there for those engaged to teach one another. Any other comments? Yeah, Katrina?
If I could, I think I want to add to what you were saying, Natalie. I've actually used it both to lecture to undergraduate and to graduate students, but I've also used it to do workshops with high school students who are not in an academic setting. And what I've done is I've picked and chosen from each of the subtopics different aspects that I wanted to raise. So with the example I gave with the Canadian Coalition for Youth, Peace and Security, I picked parts of the Women in Peacebuilding chapter or subtopic to explain the concept of peace building in a North American context by contextualizing positive and negative peace. And so I used that section of the lecture to explain. And so I think what the greatness or the way that the modules or the subtopics can be used to kind of make a puzzle, or you can pick the pieces from the puzzle to make a holistic course or workshop or whatever you want to call it, is what is unique about it, but is also what is formidable about it. Because, for example, on Thursday, I'm lecturing to a master's class on post-conflict recovery, and I've been pulling from different aspects of our subtopics, including the humanitarian action section, the experiences that we have listed by Anne-Marie in the introduction about armed conflict and experiences of women, but also as part of women as combatants. And so we can really pick and choose the aspects of the lectures that are the most relevant to the topic that we want to do and adapt them to the audience. And it doesn't only have to be, like you were saying, Natalie, about us lecturing necessarily, which is why there's so much advocacy exercises and others included in there.
Erica, please.
I just wanted to add that on that main page, I don't know if you can share that again, but there is some foundational knowledge. So if you're trying to bring this to a youth group or an advocacy group that might not understand as much about the UN, you could start there. So, and then build on it with specific topics, including this one. I don't know. If you scroll down, you'll see it in the modules list on the main page.
See if I can get there. There it is. So down here.
Go down. Yeah. So right there, it says foundation. Oh, up a bit. Yeah. Up. No, sorry.
Up.
Yeah.
That's okay. There we go.
That's it. Right there. So under the modules, the first one listed is Foundations of the UN, a primer. So that includes a lot of the, the CEDAWs and the structure of the UN, and a lot of information that for somebody who's new to the whole concept might want to go first.
Great. Thanks for pointing that out.
Sure.
There is another question in the chat. It's a great question, actually, from Nayama Barak Wolfman. I probably did not pronounce that correctly. My apologies. But the question is, well, first, this person's glad to see that we have the film screenings, our films suggestions, including Pray the Devil Back to Hell. But the question is, how do we get grassroots organizations to hear about this tool? And that's actually a question we would love to put back on our attendees in some way. But I'll open it up to the panelists here. How do we share this resource out in a way that it can be that activist organizations, grassroots organizations can know about it? Any responses here from my colleagues? Yeah, Anne-Marie?
Yeah, I saw that question from Nama as well. It's interesting, actually, Nama, that Pray the Devil Back to Hell is one of the most powerful films made about women's experience of conflict and changing the outcome. And in fact, we took a lot of inspiration, not just from the film, but from the way the director and producer had popularized it through, in fact, community teach-ins. Now, to do what they did, we don't have the resources, because they actually had resources to screen the film in the middle of nowhere in all kinds of places and working with grassroots organizations all over different African countries. So we don't have those resources. So in fact, that's why we're holding this meeting, and we should hold more, to ask those of you who are listening whether you can put just a link to the entire, the resource into your communications with your members. To encourage people to use it. We also need, in fact, a rollout strategy, because, when Katrina mentioned high school students, just last week, Model UN was having its, at least the US Model UNs were having major US-based meetings. And I spoke to one group which was actually representing, or they were the Commission on the Status of Women, and it really was striking how much they would have benefited from having a look at some of these materials beforehand. So, I wonder if we can think about a rollout strategy with secondary schools, with universities around the world. But we really need your help, people. We need ideas about how to reach out to your membership.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Sam, please. And then Erica.
Thanks. Just to jump on that and also pick up the question that's come up in the chat about translation. I think this project really doesn't, all of us did this on a volunteer basis, and there isn't ongoing funding to do so many of these things. And I think that's why it's really important that this become a greater collaboration. If you do have, there are parts of these things that probably have been translated into French. I'm using French as the example because it came up in the chat. And obviously across, Francophone Africa, there are so many activists working, and I imagine many resources that have been developed. And so we really do need to think of a way to pull in things that already exist and link them. But what I think this provides for those who want to use the resource in other places is a framework. And for many activists, they possibly don't have time to sit and think about how everything fits together and what goes with what. And so that is what this provides, and a way to think into it. It's in a PDF form at the moment, which I think is a great way to, people can print out a copy and share it, and not having to rely on a computer all the time, I think is really important. And so if you have resources that you see, oh, that links with this, and we have this, pamphlet that we use to talk to, these people, we need to start gathering those things so that we can link them and we can learn from what you are all doing with the resources. So yes, it does feel a little bit like throwing it back to the group, but really, we are in no position also, and don't represent the folks who you want to reach. So I think collaborating on this, and I think maybe Erica can also say if there is going to be a way for people to, upload things in the future, if we're going to have that sort of capacity. Thanks.
Erica?
Thanks, Sam. We are going to have that capacity. We have that capacity now. So I've just been putting the email address in the chat, whrtlar@gmail.com. For anyone who has suggestions, if they want to work on a new subtopic, I've been contacted by a number of people, organizations like Rotary, like Graduate Women is International, people who have ideas and really want to add to this, and also have ideas about using it. So we're going into full collaboration mode just as soon as CSW is over. We really just got this up online in time for CSW. Big thanks to Sarah Stanlick. I don't think she's on here, but she got it all online for us, and it was a big effort. So sort of our next mode, we're hoping to do a hard launch in April, May, and involve more groups that are not associated with the UN. So really trying to pull this out into a broader range of folks. And we would look very enthusiastically at anyone's recommendations. If you would just email those to that address, I will absolutely be back in touch with you quickly and try to work with you in any way that you want to try and get this out there. Thanks.
Yeah, Katrina. Oh, please, Sun Young, and then Katrina. Yes, please.
Okay, right. I'll go ahead. On the translation thing, I think this is so important. In fact, that's what I would have said. And the two that we see constantly being most challenging is Spanish and French. As it turns out, if we don't have some of our materials in those two languages, we eliminate whole regions, and particularly those which are experiencing conflict situations. So I can just pledge that from the fwMAP part, we will try as best as possible to explore the issue of translation. But again, sending it back to the group, even if one were to be able to translate the text, it would be very difficult to bring in the audiovisual material and some of those things in the languages. So then you would be adapting those materials from your regions and in the languages that would be suitable. But let's think of that as a really important next step. Sorry, Katrina, go ahead.
Katrina, please.
That's okay. That's okay. I wanted to add to the question of how do we reach other audiences beyond just the traditional audiences that we do have access to. And something that we did include meaningfully in the women's and feminist activism subtopic is actually, and I'll screen share this because I did not mention it earlier, and I think it's a wonderful resource. But it's a series of peace activist interviews that features various different peace activists from around the world who are working on the ground and in different ways. And so this is included and is hyperlinked within the women's and feminist peace activism subtopic. And I think that this is a way that we've tried at least to create materials that could be shared that are beyond just the typical PDF versions of words that we put to paper. And the resources that we've compiled. And I think that these can be used both for promotional purposes and also educational purposes in various ways. And the other thing is that often in these types of settings, activists are seen as not the experts. They're not considered as equal experts as academics or other policymakers. But this is what we've tried to really emphasize, at least in this subtopic and overall, is the expertise that those on the ground who are experiencing conflict and who are experiencing post-conflict recovery and who are contributing to it really do have the expertise. And we wanted to showcase this with this series of peace activist videos. And so I think that this can play both, you know, part of the module it can be contributing, and it does, but it can also play a role in promoting the module in itself.
Thank you, Katrina, for highlighting that great work. I will actually ask you now, Katrina, if you wouldn't mind introducing our next speaker. We're very privileged to have her with us, please.
Yes. Thank you so much, Natalie. And thank you everyone for your questions. I see there are more, but I'm sure we'll get to them later on. I'm really excited to be able to introduce my new colleague, Wevin Muganda, who is a peace activist from Mombasa, Kenya, and who's agreed to reflect and share her reflections with us on how she can use the modules in her context in Kenya and with her peace activism fellow activists. So I'll hand it over to Wevin, if you could share with us your reflections and your thoughts. And for everyone to know, this was the first time that Wevin had to browse the module, and therefore this is very fresh reflections that she's able to provide.
Thank you so much, Katrina. It was really nice to have a look at this resource, and I'd say as a peace builder working at the local level, it's a great addition because usually we are training young men and women in our communities from the back of our heads, just coming up with presentations here and there, but there's never a curriculum. And just to add a curriculum that has a gender perspective to it. So this was, it's a teaching and learning. So I think I'll give more of my perspective as a learner because I just looked at it once. So it feels like a Women, Peace and Security 101 course, and it's very helpful. We have peace clubs in certain parts of Kenya, and I think this can be a great addition. It can be like a curriculum for peace clubs, and we have peace clubs in primary school, which is like 13 years and below, and high schools as well. But also through training youth leaders who are a bit older, who can then disseminate this in community education sessions, which in my context are usually more informal and less about presentation. So looking at it as training youth leaders who can be the credible voices and the people who then train or teach people in the community with less formal language. But as a learner, just reflecting on the first topic really made me go into the history of conflict. Many of us and many other young people born in the late 90s and and 2000s really don't understand the history of conflict in Kenya. And I think if you're to address the issues, you really need to look at the background of this. This actually made me go and read about the history of conflict in Kenya and women's role in it. So just in Kenya, conflict has been mostly fueled by ethnicity, and the just examples of the really bad ones were the Wagala massacre, the Kayabombo clashes, the 2007 post-election violence, and it's a tribalism issue, and it has affected corruption and even development. But looking at these three conflicts, women have actually not been perpetrators, but they have been on the receiving end of it, either as victims or as peace builders, but this is also very undocumented. And I only just got this information from people who are way older. And just linking this to the subtopic on accountability is that many of the justice, transitional justice mechanisms that were set up to address these conflicts never gave reparations to women. And this really stood out for me. Women will always choose to protect their children over their own lives, and this is used as bait by armed groups to instigate violence. Another thing about the sector on accountability, just looking at what justice means for women. Most times we think that it's just going to court and having the perpetrators sentenced, but really justice looks very different for women, and especially in local communities. One of the major takeaways for me from this resource has been the gender lens approach. I think even for me previously, I thought that having a gender perspective to everything requires some level of expertise. But then I just found these questions that are so simple, and it's where are the women and where are they not? Which women count and which ones don't? And this is a practice that policymakers and duty bearers can take up as a way of ensuring more women participate and are included. I think this resource can also be helpful for stakeholders who are trying to work towards gender equality, mainstream gender. The concept of feminist peace activism and advocacy was also very powerful for me. I thought that when activism is led by a woman, then it's definitely feminist activism. But now I know it's a bit different, and it has to be in pursuit of gender equality and women's rights. And again, just to share a bit about the women's peace movement, which is also very undocumented. In 1992 in Kenya, a group of elderly women empowered by a tradition of feminist activism and collective activity went on a hunger strike. They were a group of mothers of political prisoners who acted on principles of care and justice and employed their motherhood to demand for the release of their sons. They were uneducated and to date barely got any recognition for their role in national politics and even the fight for freedom in Kenya. So just looking at the peace movement back then and right now, the similarities in it and understanding the gaps that can be addressed by current women peace builders, and especially in documenting the role of women in building peace. And that strongly comes out in the resource as well. I found it a great guide towards understanding the differences between gender mainstreaming and gender balancing, which I think especially the government of Kenya thinks the two are synonymous. So having more women in positions and definitely associating that with gender equality. And I think that the subtopic on that really brought out the differences in this and brought it into perspective. Also, again, on the rights promotion, understanding how laws and policies are generally not gender responsive, and how as women peace builders right now, we can work towards addressing the gaps in the legal system, ensuring more women have legal representation, and so on. And like I said, it really does shed light on the most, I think, a perspective that on justice that many people overlook, and that justice has to be centered on the victims and what their needs are. Overall, I think it's very important for young women activists to try to understand feminism and feminist activism. And this resource shares a lot of simple tools and ways to encourage everyday activism, which is core to my work. As a peace builder and as an activist, my focus has always been on encouraging more people towards becoming active citizens, taking up community responsibilities, and collectively working towards social justice despite their everyday 8-to-5 jobs. I would suggest having the same resource in video and audio format, as podcasts are becoming increasingly popular amongst young people, and videos can be a great way of using the resource in local communities, especially in community education sessions here in Kenya, in informal settlements, in rural communities where people gather to watch movies and films at one place, because not everyone has access to maybe Netflix or the internet or TVs. And these are also the same spots where they screen community films, social justice films. So I'm looking at this resource and having them in videos and having young people come through every Sunday to watch maybe the first topic and understand that. Of course, where resources and partnerships allow, have it in local languages as well. I'd like to end this with a quote from the resource that really spoke to me and I find very powerful. It's everyday activism is the most sustainable piece we can count on. Systems and policies must change together with people's attitudes and behaviors. The political is personal. Each of us needs to undergo our personal transformations in order to make lasting social change. It is the analogy of the oxygen mask. We must put it on ourselves before helping others. And I think that this resource is one of the critical steps towards advocating for more everyday activism. So thank you so much for coming up with this. And it's so inspiring to hear that it's volunteer-led. I really hope that we can get more volunteers to help with disseminating it and expanding it to many other places and populations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wevan, for your insights and for your leadership and your activism. You're truly inspirational. Thank you very much. So now we turn to another invited guest, and someone we're very glad to welcome into the discussion. Sarah Douglas is joining us from UN Women, and her newest position as Deputy Chief of UN Women, Peace and Security Section. Sarah's been with the UN for nearly 20 years, I think, doing anything from gender and international development to peace building to, of course, women, peace and security. So we're very grateful for your time today, Sarah, and we look forward to getting your reactions to the resource and how it might be useful in the spaces that you work. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Natalie, and thank you so much to the colleagues for inviting me today. It's lovely to see so many faces, and I keep getting Facebook alerts of 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, when we were all together physically for CSW with all kinds of leaders and women and men that we admire. And it's really nice to feel the connectedness and solidarity, even though we can't be physically together. It's been a little bit easier in terms of commuting and hair straightening, as I'm sure all of you can imagine, but I do actually really miss seeing all of you and being together and getting to share our experiences in a more tactile way, let's say, where we actually get to have coffees and run into each other. So, but it's still nice to have a connection on this virtual format. And I will say, actually, as Natalie knows, when I was trying to register for this, the CSW NGO Forum has had 25,000 registrations this year. So I think it shows how strong the demand and the desire for this connectedness is amongst all of us around the world. So it's really exciting to be here. Maybe just a couple points. So I really took a deep look at the accountability module. And overall, this resource is just incredible. And I think it's going to be so useful for our partners on the ground, where we've seen, and Anne-Marie and Sam and Mavic and many of you and I have been discussing this for years and years, how important it is that civil society advocates, that women leaders have the correct vocabulary to influence decision makers, and how often I've witnessed that just by perhaps not targeting the right word, even if the sentiment is okay, it gives the decision makers an excuse to shut down and to shut off. So I think this resource overall is so comprehensive that it's going to be really useful in providing that kind of shared vocabulary and breaking down the concepts and the language. I mean, one example that I always have used is that I've seen many times, for example, a group of women leaders who go and talk to someone working on security sector reform, and they start talking about justice issues. And of course, for women on the ground, security and justice are inextricably linked, and you can't have one without the other. And even the SG's definition of what is SSR includes justice. But then when you go and talk to the person working on SSR about justice, that person immediately says, oh, well, I'm working on security. The justice people are down the hall, and they switch it off. So those little nuances and details, which do not at all reflect the real experience of women on the ground, I think I've seen as an excuse basically to shut the door and to switch off. So I think it's really important that noting that it's not necessarily a reflection of the reality on the ground, but more a reflection of how the international system works, it's very, very useful to go into that kind of specificity and detail. I love the focus on the feminist activism in this set of modules. I think that is so important also in this context where we see that it's women's leadership that is really transforming societies and breaking down the stovepipes, let's say, between these different areas of crisis. And whether it be the climate crisis or the COVID-19 response, what's happening in Myanmar right now. I just heard from our office there that almost 70% of the people posting on social media are women. Women are also disproportionately the first responders in terms of nurses and healthcare workers, so that they're then getting targeted again for providing services to the protesters as they're getting attacked by the government. So it's so important that we really position the responses to all these different crises in this lens. So I'm really excited about that focus. Speaking specifically about accountability, I wanted to mention the Women, Peace and Security Compact, which some of you are aware of, and apologies that I had to join late, so I don't know how much of this has been discussed. But the focus of the compact is really about driving increased action against the commitments that we already have. Almost 20 years of this agenda, and as you all know, we have so many action plans, we have so many frameworks, so many resolutions, commitments, action plans, what have you, and strategies. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. But yet we see, when we look at really some of the concrete markers of progress, things are still so stagnant. And this year in the SG's report that we produce every year for the Security Council, one of the most shocking statistics for me was that over the last 10 years that we've been monitoring this, the percentage of ODA to women's organizations in fragile settings has stagnated at 0.2%. And this is just unbelievable. Overall ODA to fragile countries has skyrocketed. We all know that donors are increasingly investing in these countries, and part of that is because of conflictivity in the world. Part of it is because so many countries have been emerging from poverty and becoming middle-income countries, which is of course a good thing. But the fact that we know that investing in women's organizations is sustainable, is cost-effective. Now we even have the World Bank agreeing to that, and yet this percentage has not really moved over the last 10 years. So that's just a specific example of what we are trying to do with this compact is to mobilize action on some of those areas where we know that doing more would actually have a really tangible result. So we're trying to increase the accountability to some of these commitments that have already been made. I really liked the articulation of national action planning, as well as some of the kind of pitfalls and limitations, let's say. UN Women has been working on this for many years, as you all know, and we're always in a kind of challenging situation, because we have to, as a UN entity, sort of say that, of course, all NAPs are good because they're a show of political support of member states. So we want every member state to develop a NAP. But then, of course, we know that some are better than others. And we've been trying to articulate some, what we have termed like high impact criteria for NAPs, where if it's a matter of having an M&E framework, having a budget, having also, importantly, and I think this comes out in your module, the linkages to other processes. That I think we've seen a lot of advancements in terms of better M&E, more budgeting for NAPs, but the fact that NAPs are isolated in away from other security, budgeting, and planning processes, I think is an area where we could improve quite a bit. And I was just actually coming from another meeting on the counterterrorism issue, and one of the main, UN Women had and our partners had a huge consultation with 140 civil society activists working on preventing violent extremism last year. And that was one of the things that came out very strongly, is that national PVE and CT strategies are completely delinked from anything related to gender and women, peace, and security. And that's sort of a critical gap that needs to be addressed, so that we pull these different strands and make sure that the emerging security threats, be they climate security, preventing violent extremism, the implications of the pandemic, what have you, are being addressed with a women, peace, and security lens, so that we don't have to kind of go back and reinvent the wheel and learn all the lessons again that we've been learning over the last 10 years. So I think I'll go ahead and stop there, but I'm looking forward to any discussion and definitely more questions or comments about the compact and how we can really move. There's some compact members in the group, I know that. So how we can utilize the momentum of this process to try to really deliver better results. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sarah. We appreciate your time today. We will open the floor for discussion and questions, and I'll take the initiative on the first question, only because it links back to a conversation that we were having earlier around how can we get this resource? I mean, we know it needs improvement. We're looking for feedback, but we also want to think about how can we get it in the hands of activists, of civil society organizations, and perhaps even, those in and around the UN that may benefit from this sort of shared vocabulary and this. So I wonder if you have any thoughts on that, on how we might best make those that could benefit the most from it aware that it exists.
Sure. Well, I definitely think we should perhaps look at some targeted outreach, because there's sort of the users and the senders and the receivers, right? That we need to utilize this this package for the senders of messages as well as the receivers, being the decision makers. And I mean, I think that, despite everybody's limited appetite for Zoom, we can see even today how these types of workshops are really being well received, and they enable a lot of engagement from around the world. And that's actually a really great thing that's happened to us over the last year. So I do think that we could try to look at perhaps doing some kind of rollout launch strategy within the UN, and also targeting member states, because it's usually member states who will then kind of push certain hesitant parts of the UN system along. And that's certainly, Anne-Marie knows this one very well. You know, when we run up against blockages in the UN, it's usually with them saying, oh, well, that's a member state decision. You know, so I think being able to kind of triangulate between those different groups of stakeholders is really important, and getting the member states to be the ones to really call for better uptake of these issues amongst the decision makers within the UN.
Thank you. I'll open it up to the other panelists for questions or comments, and invite our attendees to use the chat function as well. Yeah, please, Anne-Marie.
Well, I'm really glad. Hi, Sarah. Nice to see you. I'm really glad Sarah brought up the issue of the practical use of some of these materials for women who are at the front line of negotiations, policy making, drafting gender provisions and peace agreements, and the like. You know, as all of us who toggle between academia, policy making, and activism know, a lot of the success in the policy world is about being at the right place at the right time, but also knowing, you know, how decisions are made, what kind of language works, what kind doesn't work. And there actually is, I mean, we've talked a lot about translation today. There's actually a problem of conceptual translation that has been a big challenge for feminist movements everywhere for a long time. So being able to sort of translate key concepts and key objectives into language that can go into gender provisions in a peace agreement, et cetera. Now, we did not design this program in order to necessarily equip people with that list, but the training itself should be very useful for developing appropriate positions in language, but also the links to other resources. So Sarah's remarks has, of course, now got me thinking about the next generation of the Peaceful Societies module, which we might want to use to focus specifically on issues like negotiation and mediation.
Can I just add something to that, which I wanted to go back to a comment that I think Mavic made earlier. I think what you say, Anne-Marie, is particularly important because, as Mavic points out, local peace builders are often not given the same respect as experts as are people who are coming from international organizations or academics. And Mavic pointed out, I'm saying it's Mavic, and I think it was Mavic, trying to get universities in different places, you know, in Nigeria or elsewhere, to start to get lecturers, you know. So if you have contacts at institutions and other places, to also connect with them so that the local peace builders have ways to have their expertise accredited in some way and more recognized. I think that would be a very powerful outcome of this as well, that is connected to what you were saying, Anne-Marie.
It was Mavic. She's in the chat there. Other responses, questions for Sarah, for Wevin? There's a question in the chat here from Kristen Alder. It says, can you work with NGOCSW to have site shared with all CSW attendees? It seems then that individual attendees would then share with their organizations. Still may mainly reach a privileged audience, but it's a start.
So the site is linked through the fwMAP page, which is on NGOCSW New York's website. It is going out in the newsletters too. We can see what we can do to sort of make sure it's the attendees, the CSW 65 attendees. I'll put a request in for that. Thanks for that suggestion.
Ivy is being remarkably silent on this issue. But she is the vice chair of NGOCSW.
I was actually looking for the link so that I could like embed it in the chat.
Just to explain the relationship between fwMAP and NGOCSW, as you know, NGOCSW is actually facilitating the Generation Equality Forum, and fwMAP is part of that. So that is the relationship. We are not NGOCSW. The things that we create at fwMAP may at times be a little bit controversial, which NGOCSW's role is to create a very democratic forum with different points of view. We have systematically eliminated certain voices and certain participants who are contrary to women's human rights. So, but all of the materials that we have discussed today and the link to the website is indeed on the NGOCSW website and available for everyone. So you can find it and then also connect through the different communications that we have.
Thank you. Well, we are nearing the end of our time together, but I don't want to stop conversation short. Are there any other questions or comments?
I would just like to thank everyone for participating. This has just been fantastic. The feedback we've gotten and the ideas, I'm all wound up again. So I think it'll carry us forward a long way, and that's just wonderful. Especially, to the two who gave us their sort of formal feedback. Very much appreciated. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you to UN Women for being with us today. We really hope that this relationship with the Generation Equality Forum is very strong, and that we continue to work together. Thank you, Sarah, for being with us.
Well, I will just close with thanking everyone who joined us today, thanking our attendees, and for those attendees that are here. This group here represents just a fraction of those who contributed to the overall resource. And so it is a tremendous effort with many, many volunteers, and there is much more there. So we encourage you to go beyond the Peaceful and Inclusive Societies module, check out the other 5 modules, and please send feedback and be in touch with us as we we put a lot of work into this, and we want to see it improve and be used. And so we are looking for your feedback and your engagement. So with that, I will wrap. Thank you so much, Sarah Wevin, for being with us, for taking time to look at the resource and give us some feedback. We greatly value your time and input. So thank you so much. And hopefully we'll cross paths virtually at CSW later in the week. Lovely to see you all, and take care. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Nice to see you all.
Bye, Sarah. Okay.
You can write a farewell message as well.
Yeah.
All right, a farewell message.
Farewell message.